Have you ever been just completely blindsided by someone's behavior? You think you know them, and then boom, they hit you with this really elaborate cover story.
Oh, yeah. Or they just pivot and blame some, like, convenient scapegoat for a mess that they obviously made themselves.
Exactly, and that confusion you feel, that sort of helplessness,
Yeah.
it's like you've stumbled into a play where they control the script, and you just cannot figure out your lines.
A really disorienting feeling. And what's maybe even more confusing is when we look at ourselves. I mean, why do we sometimes do or say things that we instantly regret?
Hmm.
That little bit of anger that leaks out at a colleague, or you snap at a loved one and you just immediately wish you could pull the words back.
Or that foolish enthusiasm for a new project or maybe a new relationship. You throw yourself into it, and then months later you look back and think, that was just pure emotional projection. What a waste of time and energy.
And you're always asking the same thing.
Yeah.
Where did that come from? It feels totally unwilled.
It does.
Ah.
Okay, so let's unpack this because our mission for this deep dive is to really tackle a huge fundamental misconception that's so rooted in our culture.
Which is?
It's the belief that our behavior is, for the most part, conscious, rational, and willed by us.
Right. And the sources we've looked at, I mean, key philosophical texts, a lot of psychological research, they suggest a completely different reality.
Yeah.
The core revelation, and, it can be a little unsettling at first, but it's probably the most empowering insight you can get, is that we are constantly being influenced by these primal forces that operate deep within us, way below our conscious awareness.
So we only see the result.
You only see the result. The sudden mood, the reactive thought, the big action we take, we have almost no access to the actual source that's compelling us to do it.
That's a great way to put it. It's like the difference between seeing the lightning strike and actually understanding the slow, inevitable buildup of electrical charge in the cloud.
Exactly. We're dealing with this primal current, a force that just hits a threshold of consciousness, and then we react. And then usually we explain it away after the fact with some rationalization that makes us look good.
Of course.
And this is where the clarity comes in. These forces, they aren't infinite. There's actually a limited playbook, you could say, of human drives that come from our evolutionary history.
These drives dictate pretty much everything.
Pretty much everything. The negative stuff like envy, grandiosity, irrationality, aggression, even passive aggression, and the really positive ones like our need for empathy and connection.
So understanding this limited playbook is kind of the first step.
It's the first step to gaining clarity, which, the sources all promise, can fundamentally change the trajectory of your life.
Okay, so if we accept this idea that we're governed by these underlying forces, where do we usually go wrong in our day-to-day lives? What's the central blind spot that keeps us in that state of confusion we started with?
Well, the sources point directly to our deep-rooted irrationality. I mean, what consistently causes us to go astray, to make bad decisions, disastrous miscalculations, is simply the extent to which our minds are governed by emotion.
And the blind spot is just that we can't see it in ourselves.
We can't see it. We assume we're acting rationally, that we've weighed the costs and benefits, but in reality, we're very often just serving an emotional urge. A hunger for attention, a need for control, maybe an unacknowledged bit of envy.
And this isn't a modern problem. This is baked into the human condition, right? Which I think takes us back to a really great classical case study, Pericles.
Yes, Pericles is observing the political turmoil in Athens around 432 BC as he's trying to steer the city away from a really catastrophic war with Sparta.
Right.
So Pericles, early in his career, he really studied the Athenian political class. This was, supposedly the world's first functioning democracy.
And he noticed a pattern.
A very persistent and deeply disturbing pattern. Every single major Athenian political figure believed, with absolute certainty, that they were rational. They thought their goals were realistic, that their complex maneuvers, the backroom deals, the speeches were all very shrewd and clever.
But the outcome was always chaos.
Constant chaos. The democracy was incredibly turbulent, full of corruption, and their decisions just led to self-destructiveness over and over again. So the question is, if everyone was so strategically brilliant, why was the state such a mess?
So what was his conclusion?
Pericles figured out that they weren't rational at all. They were just selfish and, shrewd in a very narrow way. Their decisions weren't guided by the common good, not even by long-term stability. They were driven by the most basic short-term emotions.
Like what?
An overwhelming hunger for personal power, a desperate desire for public attention and status, or just, the naked pursuit of money.
So they were masters of tactics.
masters of tactics to serve those personal interests. But because their motives were purely emotional, their policies never lasted, and they consistently undermined the whole system. They were the absolute epitome of emotional governance disguised as pragmatic realism.
It's so tempting to think, since ancient Athens, with all our progress, the Enlightenment, science, global communication, that we must have tamed this emotional self.
Yeah, you'd think so. But the source material pushes back on that idea, and hard.
How so?
It argues really emphatically that progress and technology haven't rewired human nature. They've just altered the forms of our emotions and how our irrationality shows up.
We're still just as susceptible to drama.
Just as susceptible to needless drama as the Athenians were in their assembly. I mean, just look
Yeah.
at new media. It enhances the age-old ability of manipulators, politicians, advertisers, influencers to play on our feelings in much subtler, more viral, and frankly, more sophisticated ways.
And the constant presence of it all, especially social media, it just eliminates that mental space you need to step back, to reflect, to calmly consider the long-term consequences.
Right, you're just constantly swept up in these viral emotional effects. And this always-on environment, it really heightens the permeability of emotions. Fear, moral outrage, righteous indignation. These feelings can jump from one person to 100,000 in an instant.
So the potential for mayhem has actually increased.
Well, I think it has.
Yeah.
The potential for large-scale social mayhem from our primitive side has only gone up because that emotional energy is so easily gathered and focused.
Social media just provides the perfect outlet for our shadow sides.
It's the perfect outlet, our tendency to constantly compare ourselves with others, to feel envy over these curated lives, to seek status through constant superficial attention. All of that has become dangerously intensified.
What about the tribal tendency? I mean, that seems to be the biggest danger in the modern world, especially politically.
Oh, that's where the platform truly excels at channeling irrationality. Tribal tendencies have found the absolute perfect medium to operate and reinforce themselves.
Yeah, you can find your echo chamber instantly.
Instantly. You find groups to identify with. They function as these virtual echo chambers where your opinions are just reinforced constantly. And then the perceived lack of, immediate physical consequence empowers people to aggressively demonize anyone they see as an outsider.
And you end up with mob intimidation.
Mob intimidation, heightened aggression, all played out in the virtual world. The core truth here is that human nature is stronger than any technology we invent. Technology just ends up shaping itself around our ancient emotional drives.
It's a perfect transition to the core of those hidden drives.
Yeah.
The shadow. We need to pivot to recognizing this shadow in action, both in other people and, maybe more terrifyingly, in ourselves.
And the shadow is defined as, what, the denied, repressed, weaker side of our personality?
Exactly. And that repressed side is like a deep emotional reservoir. If it stays unresolved, it will come out, usually under stress, fatigue, or, intoxication.
And the deeper the repression?
The greater the volatility, the more explosive the result when it finally leaks out. What's so crucial here for you to understand is what the sources call the rule of opposites.
Okay, what's that?
When people overtly display an extreme trait, say aggressive hypermasculinity, or exceptional, almost sickly niceness, overwhelming self-confidence, a saintly aura, they're almost always concealing the exact contrary, suppressed reality.
The sources give a fascinating and really clinical example of this with Richard Nixon.
Yes, he built his entire public life on projecting this image of supreme toughness, fierce resilience, and total rationality.
Right.
He was someone who feared nothing more than being thought of as weak.
Especially by his political enemies.
Right. But that public persona, it wasn't just an image. It was a deliberate concealment of the deeply vulnerable, unloved child within him, which was formed by dealing with very difficult, emotionally restrictive parents.
So his fundamental childhood needs for validation were never really met.
Never. And that vulnerable self just sank into his unconscious and became the dark side of his personality, the shadow.
So what happens when the stress hits, like during Watergate, when the pressure was just unrelenting?
The shadow stirred, and it started to dictate policy. It came out as these overwhelming insecurities, paranoia that everyone was against him, this feeling that nobody truly appreciated his genius.
And that manifested as what?
Sudden, wild, politically irrational outbursts, manipulative behaviors, a powerful, vengeful desire to harm his opponents.
Which is where the tapes come in.
Exactly. The famous White House tapes, which he desperately tried to hide, they revealed a person completely different from the public image. One observer called it the unloved child come back to life.
Wow.
Nixon had claimed publicly he never cried, never held grudges, was always in control. The tapes proved the exact opposite on all counts.
So the lesson for us is that what seems out of character is often the more true hidden character.
Precisely. The sources tell us to look for those clues, especially when you're assessing a new leader or even a potential partner.
So people who are maybe fundamentally lazy or dishonest, they leave clues.
They leave clues in the smallest details, long before their behavior causes some massive harm. The ability to gauge loyalty, conscientiousness, character, it's a vital strategic skill. You have to monitor for contradictions where people are making this over-the-top show of being progressive or moral or saintly, only to disguise a cruel or selfish shadow.
Which brings us to the underling test, a perfect, very immediate illustration of this red flag.
Yeah, with Bob Haldeman, Nixon's chief of staff, he was interviewing a job applicant, Jeb Magruder, for a top position.
And Magruder was just blown away by him during the interview. He saw Haldeman as sharp, intelligent, honest, the total professional. The facade was perfect.
Impenetrable. But the moment the meeting ended and they stepped outside to take a golf cart, the whole persona just cracked under a tiny bit of pressure.
What happened?
Haldeman realized the golf carts weren't there immediately, and he became frantic, hysterical. He started railing harshly, viciously, insultingly at the subordinates who were responsible for the missing carts.
And here's the key failure of the observer. Magruder saw it, but he ignored the sign, that sudden burst of viciousness, the deep-seated control issues. He was charmed by the aura of power and the promise of a big job.
Critical error.
A critical error, as he found out later when he got tangled up in the Watergate scandal. That little contradictory behavior, that momentary lapse of character, is often the most important signal. It reveals the control issues and the fundamental lack of character underneath that professional veneer.
So the sharp intelligence was just built on a foundation of cruelty and control.
Exactly. And if you see that pattern repeat, where a leader or a colleague treats subordinates with disdain or sudden rage over something tiny, you know the shadow is strong and the irrationality is ready to burst out at the first sign of real stress.
So moving from that irrational self to our social selves, we have to confront what the sources call the law of narcissism. We all start life with a natural degree of self-absorption, which is, I guess, a necessary form of narcissism.
It is, yeah. But if that self-love is left unchecked, it really blunts our capacity for empathy. So the mission really is to come to terms with that inward focus and learn to transform that sensitivity outward.
And that transformation is critical because people who are deeper on the narcissistic spectrum have this profound difficulty seeing others as independent people.
Right. They don't see them as having their own needs or internal lives. They view other people purely as self-objects.
What does that mean exactly?
It means their main purpose is to be instruments, tools to provide attention, validation, and constant mirroring to regulate the narcissist's really unstable self-esteem.
If they're just instruments, that explains the desire for total control.
Precisely. Their ultimate desire is to control other people as easily as they control their own arm. In a relationship, this means they'll slowly push their partner to cut off contact with friends or family. There can't be any competition for attention, no alternate sources of validation,
And no independent voices suggesting the partner should leave.
or even just question the narcissist's behavior. And if these individuals manage to get into high-level positions, a really terrible momentum starts.
Their grandiosity inflates.
It inflates further, and they become hypersensitive. They're prone to what's known as narcissistic rage if they're challenged or criticized or even just ignored.
And what's especially toxic is that they actively create drama.
They create constant drama. They'll manufacture problems, often without even realizing they're doing it, so that only they can solve them. This justifies their power, reinforces their sense of being indispensable, and guarantees they stay the absolute center of attention.
And this inner chaos, it often manifests in the company or group they lead. The example of Howard Hughes is perfect here.
Oh, Hughes is a textbook case. An individual whose early charisma and creativity let him build this huge industrial empire, but his deep inner instability and chaos were perfectly mirrored in the organization itself.
Everything had to flow through him.
Everything, no matter how small. He had to be consulted on the tiniest engineering or financial decision, micromanaging to a completely absurd degree. He'd veto the logical decisions of his own managers, undermine all delegated authority.
Which caused his best people to quit.
Top-notch engineers and executives just left in frustration. So his micromanagement wasn't just about control, it was a desperate psychological attempt to impose some kind of external order on his fragile internal world.
And the paradox is that by trying to gain that total control,
He just generated more chaos, leading to huge, unforeseen problems. And when projects inevitably failed and the pressure was on, he would conveniently fall ill, lock himself away, or just disappear completely.
the rugged individualist persona was just a cover.
A total cover for immense internal weaknesses. The truth is, the only profitable parts of his vast empire were the ones that ran completely independently of him, with zero input on their operations. He tended to burn, abandon, or destroy almost everything he created.
Let's look at an earlier, really fascinating historical figure who mastered this art of creating self-serving drama for attention. Jeanne d'Ange in 17th century France.
Jeanne de Belciel. She had this insatiable, deep-seated appetite for attention. She'd use sarcasm, passive aggression, a superior attitude to try to dominate everyone around her until she was sent to the Ursuline convent in Loudun.
And at first, she tried to get attention by being the most pious nun.
Right, she tried the pious route, being the most devoted to gain favor. But when that kind of attention wasn't enough, wasn't fast enough, she needed something bigger, something transgressive.
Which is when she faked demonic possession.
Exactly. After devouring a book that detailed all the symptoms and traits of demonology, she just gave herself all the most dramatic traits of possession. She became the absolute star of the public exorcism spectacle.
And she went further than anyone else.
She went further than all the other nuns in her degradation, her lewd behavior, her screaming fits. She had to be the best, the most recognized.
And this eventually led to her becoming a saintly relic after she died.
I mean, it's a chilling testament to the success of her lifelong ambition. Her mummified head was displayed for people to see. She finally became the center of public attention no matter the cost.
Which brings us back to empathy, which is the essential antidote to all that inward self-love. If we want to connect with people, lead them, lower their resistance, we have to transform that sensitivity outward.
And a major way to do that is by mastering the art of reading the unspoken, the non-verbal cues.
The sources highlight the truly transformative experience of Milton Erickson, the famous psychiatrist.
Right. After being suddenly paralyzed by polio, Erickson was confined to a chair and had to rely entirely on his remaining senses. He developed this intense, almost supernatural ability to register what was really going on in other people's minds.
How did he describe it?
He learned to feel what was happening in them physically. If they were feeling tension in their neck or had a clenched jaw, he registered that tension physically in himself. He said he learned to see with his ears and feel with his eyes.
Wow. That's an incredible level of empathy. And by paying that close attention to these tiny, involuntary cues, we can do two things, right?
Right. First, you can mirror moods back to people, which helps them unconsciously relax and builds a profound rapport. And second, you can spot hostility or deception before it even becomes verbal.
You can see through a fake tight smile.
Or pick up that flash of irritation that crosses their eyes before their verbal filter catches up. And this lets you either politely disengage or just stay strategically wary, which save you from a lot of unnecessary conflict down the road.
The mixed signal is a really crucial danger zone here. People will often say something positive, they'll be verbally agreeable, maybe to distract you or just fulfill the social norm.
But simultaneously display negative body language. A grimace, a slight shudder, a lopsided smile. It's a way of releasing the tension of having to be pleasant.
And as the listener, you have to prioritize the negative cue.
Always. Because it's the truth leaking out from the shadow. They are betting you'll focus on the words, which are controlled and easy, and that you'll just gloss over the physical contradiction, which is involuntary.
The same goes for sarcasm.
Exactly. If someone says something pointed, cutting, or sarcastic, but they cloak it in a joking tone or a forced smile, pay attention to the words first. That joking tone is just their repressed way of safely expressing real hostility, and you should take careful note of it, especially if it's a pattern.
This skill is political and strategic gold. The example of Chancellor Merkel observing Nicolas Sarkozy during the Euro crisis is just perfect.
It really is. Sarkozy loved to assert dominance through this aggressive, performative body language, patting people on the back, staring them down, interrupting all the time.
But Merkel, whose expertise in reading these cues is legendary, she noticed a tell during a particularly tense summit.
Yeah, while Sarkozy was projecting all this outward dominance, his foot was nervously jiggling the entire time under the table.
So the hyper-assertive posture was a distraction.
It was likely a distraction from his underlying anxiety and insecurity about the issue, and that tiny, nervous, nonverbal cue was invaluable information for Merkel. It let her see past the facade and understand his true position of stress.
That ability to see beyond the immediate surface, like Merkel did, that leads us right to our next great unconscious challenge: the tyranny of the present moment, the force of short-sightedness.
We are so prone to reacting only to immediate events, seeking quick, easy gains and instant gratification. This is the exact psychological impulse that every successful salesperson, scam artist, and demagogue exploits.
And the antidote requires a huge amount of internal effort.
It does. You have to train yourself to detach from that immediate emotional rush, to elevate your perspective, and constantly consider the long-term, often unseen ramifications of your actions.
Sometimes the wisest move is just to do nothing.
Often it is. Don't react. Let time reveal the full truth and context of a situation. Sanity and balance and strategic thinking, they're acquired powers. We are not born with them.
We see the danger of not doing this so clearly in the catastrophic story of Sir John Blunt and the South Sea Bubble in England around 1720.
Yeah, Blunt desperately wanted to rise from humble beginnings, and he wanted to turn the South Sea Company into the largest, most successful joint stock company in Europe.
And his plan was incredibly audacious.
It was. The South Sea Company would pay the English government a huge fee to take over the massive national debt at the time, a staggering 31 million, and then privatize it by selling it off as company shares,
And the public could convert their government IOUs into company stock.
promising guaranteed riches from future trade with South America. The stock just soared, fueled by intense manipulation, rumors, and this giddy, panicky mood among investors.
But Blunt's short-sighted actions created a fever of speculation that ended up working against him.
That's the key. His success inadvertently inspired this rash of absurd, smaller, speculative ventures, like one dedicated to developing a perpetual motion wheel.
Or a company that promised to import air from Scotland, right?
Exactly, and that fever diverted money away from the only venture that mattered, the South Sea Company. Every pound poured into these absurd companies, or into safer investments like land, was a pound taken away from the South Sea Foundation.
And here's the ultimate failure of perspective.
Blunt recognized the problem was growing, and yet, in a move dictated purely by fear and greed, he himself was secretly selling off his own South Sea stock for safer investments, like land. His short-sighted manipulation of the immediate market ended up destroying the very foundation of public confidence he needed to keep the bubble going.
This pattern of short-sighted thinking, it constantly shows up as unintended consequences. History is just littered with examples where well-meaning attempts to solve an immediate problem lead to the exact opposite result.
Oh, the list is endless. It shows this consistent human inability to project consequences beyond the next couple of moves.
Like the assassination of Julius Caesar in 44 BC.
The conspirators killed him specifically to restore the Roman Republic because they feared he would become a permanent monarch. And what happened?
The resulting power vacuum and chaos led directly to the rise of Octavius, who did exactly what they feared. He ended the Republic and established a monarchy.
They created the very outcome they were trying to prevent.
We see it in modern context, too. Prohibition in 1920. It was designed to curb alcoholism and moral corruption.
But instead, it substantially increased alcohol consumption, it fueled the rise of organized crime, and it led to mass social disorder. The immediate goal was just shattered by the long-term reality.
And strategically, Pearl Harbor in 1941 is maybe the ultimate example.
It has to be. The attack was intended to decimate the U.S. Navy and bring America to its knees before a long Pacific War could even start. But its success guaranteed the total, immediate mobilization of superior American manpower and resources.
It shocked the American public out of its deep isolationism.
And guaranteed Japan's ultimate defeat. The very success of the attack ensured the opposite of the desired result: total war and Japanese surrender.
So the lesson here is that our narrow time frame, our preference for daydreaming about immediate wins rather than deep analysis, makes us consistently terrible strategists.
Yeah. And the far-sighted human, the type exemplified by someone like John D. Rockefeller, operates on a completely different plane. This expanded relationship to time fosters this deep calmness, this realism, and it allows for a superior, slow strategy.
You got more pleasure from long-term goals than quick profits.
Way more pleasure in reaching multi-decade goals and overcoming adversity than he did in chasing immediate pleasures or distractions.
So when dealing with competitors, Rockefeller famously refused direct confrontation.
Never. Instead, he strategically exploited their emotional reactions and their short-sightedness, and he just allowed them to defeat themselves.
Like with his rival, Tom Scott.
Tom Scott, a key player in the railroad industry. Rockefeller correctly saw Scott as a hothead, someone who was easily enraged by the threat of Standard Oil. Scott wanted an immediate, public, head-to-head battle.
And Rockefeller wouldn't give it to him.
He just amassed vast amounts of cash in reserve and prepared to outlast him. He knew Scott's anger made him rash, arrogant, and imprudent with his money. Rockefeller just waited for Scott to make the inevitable financial mistake.
And his approach to his rival Benson was even more subtle.
Benson was deeply in love with his own operational brilliance. He wanted to be the first man to defeat the unstoppable Standard Oil. So Rockefeller baited him. He indirectly fed him information that led him to make aggressive moves in the market.
Knowing this would weaken him over time.
Exactly. It would drain his resources and burn out his drive. Rockefeller waited until Benson was emotionally and financially exhausted, which made it simple to just buy him off later.
So the strategy is to fight indirectly.
Fight indirectly, expose their vulnerabilities like hypocrisy or past dirty deeds, and make the easy, quick victory they're expecting suddenly seem much more expensive than they ever imagined.
We started by talking about that narcissistic pull inward, that natural self-absorption. The sources give a clear, counterintuitive roadmap for reversing this, transforming self-absorption into profound social influence by putting the focus intensely and strategically on other people.
Yes, the royal road to influence and power is not aggression or self-promotion. It's putting the focus squarely on the other person. Let them be the star. Let them do the talking.
Give them rare, targeted validation.
Exactly. Make them feel their opinions, their values, their stories are truly worthy of deep consideration. That kind of attention is so rare in our culture that it immediately lowers their defenses and opens their mind to your ideas, even the difficult ones.
Lyndon B. Johnson, as Senate Majority Leader, was a master of this delicate art of indirect influence.
Better than almost anyone in American history, he realized that directly asking a powerful colleague for a favor or a vote was often counterproductive. It just instantly signals your need and their superiority.
So his strategy was to always step back and assume an inferior position at first.
Always. He would seek advice, which people are dying to give because it validates their perceived expertise. Once he felt they were addicted to this validating attention, he would start a small, non-threatening cycle of favors.
Doing something minor for them.
Something minor, like helping a powerful but disorganized colleague, Senator Russell, modernize his staff or get better committee assignments.
And the psychology behind that cycle of favors is what's really fascinating.
It really is. Once people do an initial favor for you, they become psychologically compelled to keep doing them. They have to maintain the illusion that they made a rational, correct decision in helping you in the first place.
Otherwise, they'd have to question their own judgment.
Exactly. It's the power of cognitive dissonance. Johnson used this beautifully to slowly win over key figures like the Northern liberal Senator Hubert Humphrey, who the powerful Southern Democrats deeply mistrusted.
And he didn't confront that mistrust directly.
No, that would put Humphrey on the defensive. Instead, Johnson worked invisibly. He'd talk up Humphrey's humor, his energy, his character to the skeptical Southerners, subtly softening them up.
And after softening their resistance,
He reintroduced Humphrey, who then felt compelled to return the favor by winning over Northern liberals to Johnson's side. And crucially, Johnson had solved Humphrey's profound sense of political loneliness in Washington, isolating him from his usual allies and spreading his own influence like an invisible gas.
he gained immense power without ever seeming overtly ambitious.
Or aggressive or needy.
Okay, now let's switch from political influence to commercial influence and look at Coco Chanel. She mastered the art of desire by reversing her own internal covetousness outward onto her audience.
Human desire is fundamentally social. It's often based on rivalry. We covet what others covet, which leads to these rivalries of desire. We also yearn for what is transgressive, something beyond the banal limits of our everyday lives.
And Chanel, as an orphan, she grew up coveting things that were taboo or way out of reach.
She was often trapped in fantasy. But the key turning point came when she started wearing men's close-barred riding jodhpurs, a simple boater hat, functional sailor shirts.
And when she wore those clothes, she realized she was no longer the one coveting.
She became the object that others coveted. They were drawn specifically to the transgressive aspect of flouting those rigid gender roles. She reversed her perspective entirely. She stopped focusing on what she wanted and focused intensely on the audience's repressed desires and unmet fantasies.
She recognized that people don't want truth or simple honesty in fashion. They want their imaginations stimulated.
They want to be taken beyond their banal, restrictive circumstances. And the sources outline four brilliant, really primal strategies she used to manufacture and sustain this potent desire.
What's the first one?
First, the aura of mystery. She never talked about her impoverished, traumatic childhood. Instead, she made up countless, contradictory, and often fantastic stories about her past.
She controlled her public appearances.
Very carefully. She never revealed the recipe for her perfume, Chanel No. 5. Her vague, compelling logo stimulated endless public interpretation. The more contradictory the details, the more mysterious and intriguing the whole persona became.
Second was transgression.
This was the absolute core of her designs. Her clothes always had a distinct masculine edge, physically and psychologically loosening the corseted constrictions of the time, while remaining elegantly feminine.
So it allowed women to feel like they were crossing gender boundaries.
Combining freedom of movement with a subtle, modern sexuality, these were definitely not the clothes their mothers wore. They were revolutionary and slightly taboo.
Third strategy was vagueness.
She absolutely refused to define the message of her work. By leaving the interpretation open, she allowed the public, the customer, the press to project their own imagination and desires onto her and her creations.
The object then belongs to their fantasy, not her reality.
Exactly. And finally, the illusion of ubiquity. She made the object, the style, the brand seem universally desired by others, which set off that social chain reaction of covetousness that's latent in all of us.
By making something mysterious, taboo, and desired by others.
She tapped into that primal impulse to want what everyone else wants, but in a way that still felt rebellious and new.
We've talked a lot about outside influence and strategy, but the attitude we carry internally is maybe the most critical, unconscious force we have to master.
Our internal attitude deeply affects what happens to us and what we're even capable of perceiving. A constricted, negative, or bitter attitude, it narrows our experience, it automatically filters out different viewpoints, and it often stems from early childhood vulnerability and fear.
The ultimate goal is to break this constriction. The transformation of Anton Chekhov serves as an incredibly powerful model here.
Yeah, Chekhov was trapped in this painful, bitter childhood. He was constantly expecting beatings and abuse from his lazy, aggressive, and hypocritical religious zealot father. He himself grew up lazy, aggressive, and just projected his anger outward. He was stuck in a cycle of bitterness.
And the change began when his father fled to Moscow, leaving Anton alone to fend for himself.
Right. He was forced to work constantly as a tutor to support himself, and he made this strange internal discovery. He actually enjoyed the work. He found dignity and intense purpose in supporting himself and immersing his mind in his students' problems.
He realized he wasn't the miserable, worthless person his father had convinced him he was.
Exactly. And that external responsibility, that focus on productive work, it led to this profound internal clarity that allowed him to break the cycle.
Oh, so?
That's the mechanism. He realized that his imposing father wasn't some invincible tyrant, but a deeply helpless, weak old man. And with this new psychological distance, he could finally feel compassion and forgive the years of beatings.
And he saw that he and his siblings were falling into the same pattern.
Yes, bitter, secretly feeling workless, constantly blaming the father. So he consciously chose to empty his mind of that rancor. He moved to Moscow, took charge of the housework, educated his siblings, and just acted as the catalyst for positive change. He chose to be free of the past by actively breaking that constricting, resentful attitude.
Chekhov overcame bitterness, but there's another destructive attitude that's maybe more insidious: resentment.
The resentful types. Those who never felt they got enough attention or respect as children and carry that deep dissatisfaction through their whole life.
And they perpetually scan their environment for disrespect.
They see everything in deeply personal terms. The success of others isn't an inspiration, it's a personal affront. And critically, they don't explode in anger. They control their emotions perfectly.
They let the hurt incubate.
For years sometimes, until they take revenge through a shrewd, cold act of sabotage or passive aggression, usually when the victim is at their most vulnerable.
The Roman Emperor Tiberius is a classic example.
His tutor called him a pitcher molded with blood and bile. He never felt appreciated by his stepfather Augustus or the Roman people, despite his achievements. When he became emperor, he used his power to take slow, deliberate, and cruel revenge on people who had slighted him decades before. He reveled in their prolonged suffering.
So what's the antidote?
As an antidote, the sources suggest it's almost always better to explode honestly in the moment, even if irrationally, and just clear the air, than it is to stew on slights and let that toxic emotion incubate. We have to consciously stop seeing everything in personal terms. Most people are indifferent, not antagonistic. Respect has to be earned through achievement, not demanded.
So if we break that constricting, resentful cycle, what's the ideal mental state to adopt?
It's the expansive attitude. Viewing yourself fundamentally as an explorer, the ideal mind retains the flexibility, curiosity, and boundless energy of youth, but combines it with the disciplined reasoning power of an adult.
Explorers are always searching for new ideas.
They're in a continual search, they're playing with concepts, and they are intensely open to being challenged. They value that intellectual stimulation more than the fragile ego need of being right.
And by adopting this attitude, we gain a kind of inner authority.
We become much more than mere followers or rebels. We gain the authority to mold our own relationship to the world. And this connects directly to discovering real purpose, a calling or a mission that's tied to one's unique spirit, not something imposed by external belief systems or conformity.
It has to come from within.
Yes, real purpose comes from within. It's not something you find in a self-help book. It's a personal mission you feel compelled to fulfill. The sources give Leonardo da Vinci as the supreme model, with his motto, ostinato rigore.
Which means relentless rigor.
Relentless rigor. Leonardo went well beyond the requirements of any commission. He was driven by a deep personal mission to expand knowledge and serve mankind. And his fierce diligence allowed him to push past significant personal limits, like being an illegitimate son with little early direction, because his drive was internal and absolute.
Finally, let's talk about the ultimate deadline that focuses the mind and clarifies purpose, the awareness of our own mortality.
We unconsciously disconnect from the awareness of death, which allows us to have this loose, undisciplined relationship with time. We imagine we have endless time, which leads inevitably to procrastination and scattering our energy on minor things.
So that we have to see mortality as a continual deadline.
Exactly. This exercise forces us to clarify what truly matters, our most important goals, our deepest relationships, our defining projects, because this could be our last battle on Earth. If we try to avoid this awareness by just devoting ourselves to constant distractions and minor business, we risk becoming bitter and resentful in old age, haunted by the sense of having lived in vain.
The experience of the great writer Flannery O'Connor illustrates this clarifying effect so powerfully.
She was diagnosed with fatal lupus early in life, and she found the strange, difficult blessing in the clarity of having limited time.
She used the physical pain and the certainty of that deadline to realize her full writing potential.
She succeeded where she felt her father had failed. She committed completely and without ego to her work. Being so intensely focused allowed her to completely forget herself and just inhabit her characters. It was a religious-like flow experience where she lost her ego.
She wrote that she could, with one eye squinted, take it all as a blessing.
Because it forced her to be ruthlessly honest about what truly mattered.
That awareness of death led to her true freedom, the ability to cut loose from illusions, avoid evasions, be daring in her writing.
And commit fully to her work and relationships. It even helped her overcome some of her internalized societal prejudices and embrace the early civil rights movement. It clarified her actions, making her relish every minute and not take petty daily concerns seriously.
So when we turn around our natural aversion to mortality and we explore it closely,
we experience that true freedom, the ability to stop restricting what we think and do just to make life feel artificially predictable.
We've covered a huge amount of ground today. We started with that simple feeling of confusion and helplessness and realized that feeling comes from these primal, unconscious forces like envy, grandiosity, and short-sightedness.
We saw how the illusion of rationality, which we saw in the chaos of the Athenian politicians, still dictates so much behavior today, especially when it's amplified by modern viral media.
We covered the necessity of transforming that inward self-absorption, recognizing the destructive narcissistic pattern that sees others as self-objects, and instead cultivating outward empathy.
Right. Mastering the reading of nonverbal cues as brilliantly demonstrated by Milton Erickson and Chancellor Merkel's strategic observations.
And we addressed the tyranny of the present moment, realizing that short-sightedness, whether it's causing the South Sea bubble to collapse or generating those ironic historical consequences like prohibition, has to be countered by the calm, emotionally detached, far-sighted strategy of figures like Rockefeller.
And we concluded by finding power in internal transformation shedding, the constricting attitudes of bitterness and resentment, Adopting that expansive explorer mindset that values challenge, and embracing mortality as the ultimate necessary deadline that clarifies and focuses our true personal calling, just as it did for Flannery O'Connor.
I think the key takeaway for you, the learner, is simple, but it's monumental. Clarity about yourself and about the limited nature of these core human forces can fundamentally change the course of your life.
Knowledge is power, but only when we use that awareness, like consciously using our tendency for social comparison as a spur to excel, or realizing the extent of our own irrationality so we can subtract emotion and become truly strategic.
The source material posits that the terror of death has shaped so much of our beliefs, our religions, our institutions, and our cultural evasions, ultimately making us slaves to our fears.
So, if true awareness of mortality grants true freedom, what is the one essential project or relationship you have been postponing because you thought you had endless time? What must you commit to completely, starting now, to escape the pattern of living in vain?